Welcome to Bitter Clues. I'm Jennifer, and my partner Brian and I will take turns narrating these stories. Thanks for watching.
On the morning of October 11th, 1998, around 7 a.m. in New Taipei City, Taiwan, a man on a motorcycle was delivering newspapers door to door. His next stop was the home of the Lin family. Normally, whenever he came by in the morning, he would see Mr. Lin Yin-shu, the 50-year-old head of the household, out in the yard doing light stretches before collecting his paper. But that day felt strangely different. The yard was empty. Thinking maybe Mr. Lin was unwell, the deliveryman tossed the paper onto the porch as usual. But just as he was about to leave, something at the front entrance caught his eye. Red stains, shaped like footprints. It sent a chill down his spine. Uneasy, he called out loudly, "Newspaper delivery. Anyone home?" But no one answered. Concerned, he went next door to ask a neighbor, "Have you seen the Lin family? There are some strange red stains at their door. It looks suspicious." Moments later, the neighbor joined him, and together they carefully approached the Lin home. To their alarm, the front door was already ajar. The instant they stepped inside, the overwhelming stench of blood hit them like a wall. The house reeked of something terrible, and what they saw next was beyond imagination. In the middle of the living room, Mr. Lin Yin-shu and his wife, Chung Mi-kwan, lay lifeless in pools of blood. Their bodies were brutally mutilated, slashed and beaten so severely that they were hardly recognizable. Blood had splattered across the walls and soaked deep into the floor. Even more horrifying were the drag marks, clear evidence that the bodies had been moved across the floor and up the stairs. The delivery man and neighbor were so horrified they ran outside vomiting before calling the police. Within minutes, the quiet residential street was swarming with dozens of patrol cars. But even seasoned detectives were left shaken. The scene inside was so drenched in blood, one investigator later said it looked as if a child had dumped an entire bucket of red paint across the house. But here's where the story takes an even more shocking turn. When the bodies were brought in for autopsy, the findings left investigators speechless. While most of the wounds were concentrated on the head and upper body, the violence covered almost every part of their bodies. Mr. Lin had suffered over 60 stab wounds, while Mrs. Chung bore 45 separate stab injuries. Altogether, that was 109 stab wounds, meaning the killer struck more than 100 times with unrelenting rage. Some of the wounds were so deep that a 20-centimeter blade pierced completely through the body. One of Mr. Lin's fingers had even been severed. The brutality suggested the murderer wasn't just trying to kill, they were consumed with hatred and fury. But the surprises didn't stop there. At first, investigators thought the living room, where the bodies were found in pools of blood, was the primary crime scene. But as they searched further, they realized that wasn't the case. Upstairs, in the couple's bedroom, the police found evidence of a violent struggle. Furniture was overturned, a vanity table, chairs, and a wardrobe were smashed, and large amounts of blood were spattered everywhere. The bloody trail led from the bedroom, down the staircase, and into the living room, confirming that the couple had first been attacked upstairs before desperately fleeing downstairs. At the base of the stairs, police also discovered a crucial piece of evidence, a bloody footprint believed to belong to the killer. And then came another puzzling detail. Mr. Lin was known for his wealth. He was often seen wearing an expensive Rolex watch. Even on the day of his death, the watch was still on his wrist. But strangely, 4 of his fingers had been severed, and yet the Rolex remained untouched. If this had been a robbery, surely the killer would have taken such a valuable item. Even more telling, there were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house. The police quickly realized this was not the work of a random burglar. This was someone the family knew. With that, investigators turned their focus to those closest to the victims. Their acquaintances, business rivals, debt connections, and even their extended relatives, determined to uncover who harbored such deep hatred for the Lin family. As investigators dug deeper, they learned that Mr. and Mrs. Lin had achieved great success in the restaurant business. They owned a popular eatery, well loved in the local community. Both were known to be warm, generous, and kind to customers. Because of their good reputation, it was difficult for police to imagine who might have held a grudge strong enough to commit such brutality. The only unusual detail in the family's background was that this was a blended household. Mr. Lin had 2 daughters from a previous marriage. After his divorce, the daughters stayed with their mother. Later, after remarrying his current wife, Mrs. Cheng, he had 1 son, their only child together, 18-year-old Lin Qingwei. Neighbors said that despite being a blended family, the household always seemed stable and happy. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. But then, a startling realization struck investigators. Where was the 18-year-old son? From the very moment the murders were discovered, Qingwei's whereabouts had been unknown. Despite police swarming the house and the entire neighborhood, the teenager was nowhere to be found. Officers decided to check his usual hangouts. Strangely, his bright red sports car, reportedly a gift from his mother, was also missing. The situation grew more suspicious by the minute. Inside the son's upstairs bedroom, investigators uncovered bloody footprints, along with tissues used to wipe away bloodstains. His wardrobe had been ransacked, as though clothes were hastily taken. Had the son been kidnapped? Or had he run away? At first, police couldn't rule out the possibility of abduction. But then neighbors came forward with troubling testimony. They explained that the boy wasn't exactly the studious type. He loved to party and often stayed out late. In fact, just recently, they noticed he had started bringing groups of friends over to the house. Some even suspected these friends were practically living there. Most shocking of all, neighbors recalled the night before the murders. The house was so loud and rowdy that several complained it was unbearable. This revelation changed everything. If Qingwei and his friends had been inside the house the night of the killings, the idea that he had been kidnapped suddenly seemed very unlikely. After hearing the neighbor's testimony, police began to strongly suspect that Lin Qingwei himself might be the culprit. He had already disappeared for an entire day, and if he truly was the murderer, there was a very real chance he was trying to flee. Investigators immediately set out to track him down. But remember, this was 1998. Back then, Taiwan had virtually no CCTV tracking system, which meant his movements were nearly impossible to trace. In the end, police came up with a bold plan: a psychological trap. They leaked information to the media, claiming a couple in their 50s has been killed. It looks like a case of armed robbery. They also suggested they needed help from locals to confirm whether there had been other victims nearby. The strategy worked. The very next morning, at 7 a.m., Lin Qingwei walked into the police station with 5 friends. Among them were his male friend Su Anjung, his girlfriend Lai Yiyu, and 3 other female classmates, Lu Yi, Chang Yuru, and Zhou Suyin. But what stunned officers even more was Lin's composure. Just a day earlier, the brutal murder of his parents had made headlines across the country. Yet he showed no signs of grief or shock. Instead, he calmly said, "I just need to check on the items that were stolen, right?" That single remark convinced police he was hiding something, and they immediately arrested him. Still, the case was far from solved. During questioning, Lin remained unnervingly relaxed. Even stranger, his 5 friends all seemed to have their stories perfectly aligned, as though they had rehearsed. Their alibi was simple. On the night of October 10th, they had all gathered at Lin's home. Then, around 11 p.m., someone suggested, "Let's take a trip." On a whim, they packed their things and left for Mingshan and Beisha Beach for an overnight hike and getaway. The alibi sounded airtight, too airtight. So the police asked, "While you were on this trip, what time did you see the news? And exactly where were you traveling?" That's when suspicions grew stronger. Investigators pressed harder, and suddenly, Lin Qingwei and his 5 friends fell silent, fumbling for answers. Moments later, Lin grew nervous. He began biting at his fingernails. That tiny gesture caught the sharp eyes of the detectives. His nails looked like they had been freshly trimmed just hours earlier. Short, even, and too clean. But then came the detail that changed everything. Between the edges of his nails, police spotted dark, dried, red stains. Immediately, an officer asked, "What's this under your nails?" "Isn't this blood?" Cornered, Lin stammered, Yes, but it's nothing serious. We went hiking in the mountains. I got bitten by mosquitoes, scratched the bites, and that's why there's blood." He rambled on about there being lots of mosquitoes during a night hike. To support his story, he rolled up his pants and said, "Look, I have mosquito bites all over my legs." But instead of insect bites, what caught the officer's eyes was something far more damning: bloodstains on his toenails. This meant only one thing. Lin had been at the crime scene when the murders occurred. Police immediately restrained him and collected samples from both his fingernails and toenails. Laboratory tests soon confirmed the blood type matched that of Mr. and Mrs. Lin. Unfortunately, in 1998, DNA technology in Taiwan wasn't advanced enough to give a precise match. Only blood type comparison was possible. That left the case without absolute proof. But investigators weren't ready to give up. They decided to launch another strategy, this time to force a confession. They gathered Lin's 4 female friends, including his girlfriend, and brought them into a large hall. The girls were herded into a corner, close enough to see one another, and police began interrogating them all at once. But the setup was clever. The friends were placed far enough apart that they could see each other, but not hear each other's voices. That distance created a psychological trap. No one knew what the others might be confessing. Anxiety grew visible. Some of them began fidgeting nervously, their composure cracking. In particular, Liu Yixin and Zhuo Yin looked the most unsettled. Sensing the moment, the police struck. "Your friends have already confessed. And we know you were the ringleader. If you don't start talking now, all of this will fall on you alone." Those words hit like a hammer. Terrified, the 2 young women broke first. Shaking, they began spilling out the truth, piece by piece, revealing what had actually happened in the days leading up to the brutal crime. The revelations painted a picture of a spoiled youth drowning in excess. The victims, the Lin couple, were successful restaurant owners who had amassed wealth and status in their community. And for their only son, 18-year-old Lin Qingwei, nothing was ever out of reach. From a young age, he was indulged beyond reason. In middle school, his parents bought him a luxury motorcycle just to get to class. They always made sure his laptops were the latest model. By the time he turned 18, they gifted him a red sports car worth nearly 40 million won, a dream car for any teenager. On top of that, his monthly allowance was an astounding 1 million won. Everyone at school knew him as the rich kid, and the reputation stuck. But instead of gratitude, Ching Wei grew entitled and reckless. He hated studying, refused to attend a regular high school, and enrolled in a 5-year technical school. Even then, he dropped out within 3 years. His father, frustrated but still hopeful, tried to redirect him. "If you don't want to study, then at least help out at our restaurant." But Lin quickly quit that too. Where did he end up instead? Bars, nightclubs, casinos, and eventually, drugs. With money flowing freely from home, he squandered it all on vice. And of course, he surrounded himself with friends just like him. Among his inner circle were 5 close companions. 4 girls and 1 boy, who partied with him, drank with him, and joined him in experimenting with drugs. It was this reckless group that became entangled in the shocking double murder. Lin Qingwei's only male friend in the group was Su Anzheng. The two had met under questionable circumstances. At the time, Qingwei had run out of money to buy drugs. Rather than asking his parents yet again, he briefly worked at an entertainment bar, and that's where he crossed paths with Su Anzheng. Through Su, he was later introduced to Zhang Yuro and Liu Yixin, both older women. The boys treated them with a kind of fake respect, calling them big sisters, though in reality, they partied together as equals. Not long after, Zhuo Siyin and Lai Yingyu also joined through connections, forming what would become their 6-member crew, a group of reckless teens and young adults living fast with no direction. Before long, Lai Yingyu and Lin Qingwei began dating, and the group became even more tightly bound. Meanwhile, the spoiled son kept demanding money from his parents. His father, exhausted and angry at his son's worsening behavior, often lost his temper. Still, he couldn't completely cut him off. After all, Qingwei was his only son, the one he had raised with every luxury. Each time, he convinced himself, if I help him just one more time, maybe he'll change. Maybe this will be the last, but Qingwei only grew bolder. One day, he crossed a new line. "Dad, I'm bringing my girlfriend over to live here. I'll need money to take care of her too." And he didn't stop there. Soon after, his male friend, Su Anzheng, also quit working and was invited by Qingwei to live in the family home. Just like that, 3 teenagers moved into the Lin household, fed, sheltered, and supported by the very parents who were growing increasingly worried. The trio, however, had no plans to work or study. They spent their days lounging, eating, and enjoying the comforts of the household while contributing nothing. For the parents, it was a nightmare. They scolded their son repeatedly, asking why he refused to grow up or show any sign of progress. But his replies were shockingly arrogant. "What am I doing wrong? I only drink, smoke, and do some drugs. Dad, you're overreacting. And besides, we have plenty of money. Why are you being so stingy?" It was the kind of response that left his parents utterly speechless. He just let his father's nagging wash over him, until one day everything snapped. They were all hanging out together with the crew when his father suddenly raised his voice. "Do you even have any sense? How long do we have to keep understanding you? And how long are your friends going to stay here?" Lin Qingwei froze. He'd never been scolded like that in front of everyone. He'd always been the spoiled rich kid, the one who strutted around with his friends. To be humiliated like that, publicly, was unbearable. Rage built inside him. He clenched his fist, his body trembling, and a dark thought formed. Screw it. I'll kill them all. If they're dead, everything will be mine anyway. About a week before the murders on October 3rd, Qingwei called his friends together. He told them bluntly, I'm going to kill my parents. They've got money. If any of you help, I'll split it with you. In that group, he'd been the ringleader. His pitch struck a chord. The others, hot-headed and living for trouble, sympathized and quickly warmed to the idea. The lure of a big payout sealed it. "Count me in," they said. Over the next few days, they bunkered down and planned the whole thing. How to do it, who would do what, who would play which role. Ideas were thrown around. Dose them with alcohol, stage an accident, drug them while they slept. After long debate, they settled on using sedatives, drug the couple to sleep, then kill them while they were unconscious. Fatefully, 3 of the girls in the group had nursing training and knew about medications. One of them, Jo Si-yin, even worked as a nurse, so they had people who understood how to handle drugs. They took advantage of easy access at the hospital and over 2 days stole sedatives, 2 vials and syringes, everything they thought they'd need. Everything seemed to be falling into place. The night before the planned attack, they celebrated with heavy drinking, treating it like a victory party. On the evening of October 10th, the parents were out at a friend's wedding, and the group ran through the plan one last time. Mix the powdered sedative into their tea, they told each other. Once they're asleep, we finish it. Roles were assigned, and then they settled in, playing cards and watching TV, completely lacking remorse. If anything, they were excited for what was coming. When the couple returned around 10 p.m., the atmosphere shifted. The father scolded his son for lounging by the TV and even struck him. The son snapped. He stomped upstairs, declared he couldn't take it any longer, and pulled out the drugs to carry out the plan. He slipped something into the parents' tea. But when the liquid changed color unexpectedly, alarm bells went off. Fearing suspicion, he dumped the drinks and improvised. The revised plan was brutal in its simplicity. Wait until the parents were asleep, then have the men enter the bedroom to attack while the women blocked escape routes. If the first attempt failed, the women were to finish the job. By 11 p.m., the house had quieted, and the couple were asleep in their room, their steady breathing, the only sound in the house. They all moved at once. The son, Lin Ching-wei, grabbed 5 kitchen knives and a paring knife from the kitchen and handed the others their weapons. "Each of you take one. We'll kill 1 person each," he said, assigning a target for each attacker. He pressed knives into the hands of the 4 girls too, telling them bluntly that if the men failed, it would be up to them to finish the job. Around 1:30 a.m., Lin, knife in hand, crept into the bedroom and drove the blade into his sleeping father. The father screamed, but Lin didn't stop. Frenzied, he kept striking until his father's fingers were severed and his scalp was torn by multiple wounds. The mother, who slept nearby, woke up in the chaos. Without hesitation, Lin lunged at her with the knife. She begged, "Don't do this to me, my child." But Lin's eyes had already glazed over, and the plea had no effect. The father staggered up and tried to intervene, and the 3 of them became locked in a violent struggle. One of the friends, Su Jae, watched in stunned paralysis, frozen as blood sprayed and murder unfolded before him, then backed away and curled up in a corner, trembling with fear. Upstairs in the hallway, Zhang Wei and Liu Yi heard the screams and rushed toward the bedroom, but the sight there terrified them. Both slipped into a side room and hid beside a bed. Meanwhile, the wounded parents managed to stagger downstairs to escape, bleeding and growing faint, determined not to die. But when they reached the first floor, the remaining friends were waiting. But seeing the blood-soaked couple, the 3 friends upstairs were terrified. Panic washed over them. One let out a scream, dropped the knife he was holding, and ran. Two others hid under the dining table, clinging to each other for comfort, while the remaining friend crawled into the bathroom and curled up, paralyzed with fear. The pair under the table eventually scrambled out and bolted for the door. From Lin Qingwei's point of view, their flight was infuriating. They had all agreed to carry out the killings together, and now they were running and hiding, leaving him to act alone. He couldn't stop. He sprinted after his mother as she tried to flee to the first floor, grabbed her, and repeatedly plunged the knife into her head and body. From the stairwell, the father launched a desperate counterattack with whatever he could grab, but Lin's assault continued. The father resisted fiercely, more fiercely than anyone expected. At one point, Lin shouted that if the father didn't give up, his mother would die by his hand, and then drove the knife down into the wife. The scene was unbearable. One of the friends from upstairs, Suen, finally rushed down the stairs, but it was too late. Lin seized his mother, drove a blade some 20 centimeters deep into her chest, and then turned on his father. With the help of a friend, he struck the father repeatedly until he fell. Standing over their bloodied bodies, Lin felt a grim sense of finality. It's over, he thought, but unease gnawed at him. He feared they might still be faking death, that somehow they weren't really gone. That worry pushed him to linger, uncertain and unsettled. He gathered the friends who had fled and ordered Jusi, the one who was a nurse, to inject the parents' bodies with potassium chloride, making sure they were dead. Seeing the blood-slick room and the pools of blood, the others finally grasped the horror of what they'd done. Even then, Lin Qingwei showed no sign of remorse. He had other business to finish. "Let's burn the place down," he said, and told them to bring fuel. When Suen froze in terror, Lin moved on his own. He dragged an LPG gas cylinder next to the bodies and went to light it. But one of the friends stepped in to stop him. In the end, they piled into a car and drove off, leaving the scene as it was. At the time, none of the friends dared suggest turning themselves in. Any resistance might have meant death at Lin's hands. As they put distance between themselves and the house, fear and guilt began to fade. Soon someone asked, "When do we get the money?" That night, the six of them laughed and celebrated, imagining the payoff. Foolishly, they didn't consider that suspicion would fall on the son. In the end, the vain hope of quick cash led Lin to surrender. He went to the police voluntarily and was arrested within 48 hours of the crime. The long-awaited trial finally began, and all 6 defendants, including Lin Qingwei, pleaded their innocence in one form or another. The friends admitted they had helped plan the crime, but insisted they were too terrified to follow through. "We ran away. We never attacked them," they said. Forensic evidence partly supported this. Of the 109 stab wounds found on the parents' bodies, only 3 were inflicted by Suen Zheng. The remaining 106 wounds all came from Lin Qingwei himself. Suen even argued for leniency, claiming, "I was the one who stopped him from burning the house down." But the Taiwanese court did not view their roles lightly. Even if most of them hadn't struck the fatal blows, they had conspired in the murder and celebrated with a party afterward. That, the court said, made them all culpable. Sentences were harsh. Suen Zheng received 16 years. Lai Ying got 10 years. Liu Yuxin received 5 years. Zhang Yulu received 14 years. Zhuo Xiyin got 13 years. Shockingly, most of these friends had only known each other a year at most, some as little as 3 months. Their shallow bond had led them all into ruin. Finally came the question of Lin Qingwei's fate. Despite his defiance and repeated claims of being misunderstood, the evidence was overwhelming. On January 2002, at just 22 years old, Lin Qingwei was sentenced to death. 4 months after his sentence, Lin Qingwei's execution was carried out with unusual speed. But even in his final days, there was one more twist. Facing death, Lin requested that his organs be donated as an act of atonement. His heart, both kidneys, a pair of corneas, skin, and even bone were all harvested and given to patients in desperate need of transplants. For those who received them, it must have been life-saving news. Yet one can't help but wonder, if they knew those organs once belonged to a man who butchered his own parents, could they ever truly rejoice? And there's one more twist. 15 years later, in 2013, the case was back in the headlines. Why? Because one of the accomplices, Zhang Yulu, who had been sentenced to 14 years, was released early on parole in 2010. To make a living, he set up a small stall in the market. But just 3 years later, Zhang was involved in another violent incident. After a dispute with another vendor, he hurled sulfuric acid and then chased the man with a knife. An acid attack, terrifying in itself. It makes you wonder, after spending years behind bars, did prison reform him at all? Or was he always destined to repeat violence, the same reason he joined Lin Qing's conspiracy in the first place? And if people like him are paroled, only to commit more crimes? Then what's the point of sentencing, of prison, of supposed justice? It leaves us with a haunting question. Does true justice really exist? If this video was helpful or enjoyable, a subscription would really help me keep making more. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Until next time, stay safe.